Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are plunging right into the blood, gold, and absolute chaos of 11th century Constantinople. We're tracking the epic origin story of a guy often called the last great Viking. This is the story of Harald Hardrada, the Thunderbolt of the North, and his literally unbelievable years in exile.
To really set the stakes here, I want you to just listen to this incredible historical account. Quote, "The emperor was in the end dragged out of his sanctuary, blinded and exiled to a monastery. It was Harald himself who blinded Michael V." End quote. I mean, wow. That is the absolute blood-soaked climax of Harald's explosive career in the Byzantine Empire. But you've got to wonder, how on earth did a Viking warrior from the frosty fjords of Norway end up personally blinding a Roman emperor right in the heart of the Mediterranean? Well, let's jump back in time and find out.
Chapter 1. Escape from the Empire, the Chaos of 1042.
So, to set the scene for you, it's the year 1042, and the capital of the greatest empire on Earth is basically tearing itself apart in a massive revolt. And right in the middle of this total chaos, a ruthless Norse mercenary commander is making a desperate break for freedom. He's violently smashing his ships directly across the heavy iron chains that guarded the Bosphorus Strait. He's escaping the empire, sure, but he is definitely not leaving empty-handed. Which brings us to the number 3. Before making this explosive exit, Harald had participated in something the Norse sagas actually call pollutisvarf, which is essentially the systematic, massive looting of the imperial palace's exchequer. And he didn't just do this once, no. He got in on this extreme palace plunder 3 separate times, likely right after the deaths of 3 different Byzantine emperors. He gathered a staggering amount of wealth doing this. But to understand how we even got inside that palace in the first place, we really need to rewind.
Chapter 2. Blood, Defeat, and Exile. Rewinding to 1030.
We need to see exactly how a defeated teenager bleeding out on a battlefield somehow became one of the most feared military commanders of the entire Mediterranean world. And to wrap your head around this, you really have to look at the sheer, unbelievable geographical scale of his journey. Born in Ringerike, Norway in 1015, Harald's royal ambitions were crushed super early. In 1030, at just 15 years old, he's fighting alongside his half-brother, King Olaf, at the Battle of Stiklestad. It goes badly. They're defeated, Olaf is killed, and Harald is severely wounded. He's forced to flee for his life, ending up exiled in Kievan Rus by 1031. But as you'll see, Harald's ambitions were way, way too big for the cold north. By 1034, he makes a massive trek even further south, going all the way to the glittering, wealthy metropolis of Constantinople.
Chapter 3. Rise of the Varangian, the mercenary commander. Once he actually reaches the city, Harald doesn't mess around. He offers his sword directly to the Byzantine Emperor. And he finds his absolute true calling in the elite Varangian Guard. Now, if you aren't familiar, these were the fiercely loyal shock troops and the personal bodyguards of the emperor himself. Made up mostly of fierce Northmen and Rus warriors, they were the ultimate mercenaries. For Harald, though, this wasn't just a paycheck. It was a blood-soaked proving ground in the east where he could really let his tactical genius shine. It kicked off his incredibly rapid and, let's be honest, violent ascent up the ranks of the Byzantine military machine. And man, was he terrifyingly effective. Let's rapid fire through some of his legendary campaigns here. According to his skalds, basically his court poets, Harald captured an absolutely mind-boggling 80 Arab strongholds down in Mesopotamia. He then fought relentlessly in Sicily under the very famous Byzantine general George Maniakes. And if that wasn't enough, he gets sent to the Balkans, where he completely crushes the Bulgarian uprising of Peter Delian. His ruthless efficiency in that specific campaign actually earned him a terrifying new nickname, the Bulgar-Burner. And this brilliantly illustrates a really fascinating dramatic irony, because on one side you have Harald's royal Norwegian bloodline and his unmatched, literally legendary battlefield success. But on the other side, the Byzantines awarded him surprisingly low-ranking titles. We're talking titles like Manglabites and Spathro Candidos, which basically translate to just a guardsman and a subaltern officer. Now, a Byzantine author named Kakamenos actually noted that Harald didn't even grumble about these low ranks. Why? Because the Byzantines had absolutely no idea they were harboring a guy with a royal destiny, a guy who was secretly hoarding massive amounts of wealth so he could eventually go buy his own empire.
Chapter 4. Vengeance and Great Escape. The Betrayal.
The crucial thing to remember here is that this uneasy arrangement, it couldn't last forever. The political landscape in Constantinople was a deadly, insanely complex game of chess, and the sudden death of Harald's imperial patrons meant his status was about to flip overnight. In 1041, the new emperor, Michael V, takes power, and he immediately betrays our anti-hero. He has Harald arrested and thrown right into prison. Now, the historical sources are actually a bit conflicted on the exact charges here. Some say he defrauded the imperial treasure. Others claim he was locked up for murder, or even for defiling a noblewoman. But whatever the official excuse was, Harald found himself stuck in a dark Byzantine dungeon.
Which brings us to a fantastic question. How exactly does a captive Viking outmaneuver the emperor of the Byzantine Empire? Think about it. You have a warrior who is totally used to open battlefields, and now he's trapped in a political prison in literally the most fortified city on Earth. So, let's see how he pulls off the explosive third act of his exile. It goes down in 4 breathtaking steps. First, Harald manages to break out of prison right smack in the middle of a massive, citywide revolt against the emperor. Second, he takes command of his loyal Varangian guards and leads them to storm the actual palace sanctuary. Third, as we heard at the very beginning of this explainer, he personally blinds Emperor Michael V. And finally, with the entire city in total upheaval, he grabs his ships and violently smashes right through the heavy iron Bosphorus chains, sailing out into the Black Sea to sweet freedom.
Chapter 5. The Thunderbolt returns, claiming a destiny.
So he had just survived the deadliest politics in the world. Now, the Thunderbolt of the North safely navigated the Black Sea, heading straight back to Kievan Rus to collect his hidden wealth. His ultimate goal, claiming the destiny that had been denied to him since he was 15 years old. And honestly, just look at how fast this mercenary transforms back into royalty. In 1042, he retrieves his massive hidden treasure from Grand Prince Yaroslav the Wise. By 1045, his status is so elevated that he actually marries Ellisif, the daughter of the Grand Prince himself. And finally, in 1046, fully funded and allied with some incredibly powerful rulers, he heads back to Scandinavia to claim the Norwegian throne. He quite literally used his Byzantine gold to buy himself an empire.
And speaking of that gold, I just love the specific details we get from the primary sources here. According to his skald, Jodel Alv Arnarsson, when Harald's ship finally returned to Swedish shores on his way over to Norway, the vessel was completely unbalanced. I mean, it was literally leaning sideways in the water because of the sheer massive weight of the Byzantine gold he had smuggled out. Just picture that for a second. That is an incredible visual of a man bringing the absolute riches of the East all the way back to the Viking North.
He would go on to rule Norway with an iron fist, which is actually how he earned his famous nickname, Hardrada, meaning hard ruler. But as you might guess, his massive ambition didn't just stop there. He very quickly started looking across the North Sea toward another throne entirely, which leaves us with this final provocative question. What happens when the Thunderbolt of the North finally strikes England? Well, I'll tell you this much. That ultimate clash at Stamford Bridge in 1066 is a story that brings the entire Viking Age to a really bloody conclusion, and it is absolutely something you're going to want to dig into next. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.